In this week's streaming audio, we're speaking to Amy Chen of DBT Labs, and I had great fun recording this one. Their perspective on the world we're all trying to get to is really interesting. Much like us over here at Confluent, they're deeply immersed in this idea of building data pipelines and thinking about all the different fronts on which you can try and improve that process. But we're each coming at it from very different beginnings. You could say that in the world of Apache Kafka, we started with programmers writing streaming code, and we're gradually moving into this space of making that more accessible for everyone. Whereas DBT seem to have started with making batch SQL jobs more accessible, and they're gradually moving into the world of streaming programmers. So same targets, but if we get Amy in, we can get a fresh perspective on how to get to those targets. And we ended up chatting about all sorts of things, covering things from effective testing strategies and what a modern data tool set should look like, to what we can do to improve people's workflow and access to data for everyone in the business. So as ever, this podcast is brought to you by Confluent Developer, and I'll tell you more about that at the end. But for now, I'm your host, Kris Jenkins. This is Streaming Audio. Let's get into it. Joining us today is Amy Chen. How are you doing, Amy?
I'm good. So excited to be here today.
It's good to have you. You're one of the people on my hit list that did.
Oh my goodness!
No,
that
not
sounds
in
violent.
That sense. Yeah, it really does. Let me put in.
Kris.
You're another one of my select guests from the panel we did at Current back in October 22.
Yeah,
we were
that
there.
was so fun.
It was fun, wasn't it? With a few cool people talking about batch versus streaming. And I thought, I've got to get you on to the show so we can talk about what's really going through your head.
True. As long as I don't get too vendory, right?
Yes. You got. If anyone's not heard that episode, you got into deep trouble for getting too sales pitchy. I almost had to throw you off the stage.
I know. I'm so happy that in this situation, you really can't physically push me off the stage or take the mic from me, which is, I'm not going to lie, don't want to be ever in that state. As I mentioned earlier, it's like a feudal state where you're just like, oh God, this is like amazing and also overwhelming and stressful to talk on stage where we haven't prepared anything. And it's just the comfort zone is like, I know my tool.
Yeah. But is there a risk that if you put someone in front of 100 people, put a spotlight on them and shove a microphone in their hand, they reveal who they truly are?
Oh,
you're a vendor shill, Amy.
Oh no! I'm like, don't curse on this,
Okay.
especially because my marketing team has come to me multiple times saying Amy needs to stop cursing on things. I hope that I don't think this is like a drunken state where this is the real me. I'm the reason why I'm very mindful about what I post on data Twitter is just because I know I can't. Sometimes my real feelings just really shouldn't be revealed on what actually is useful.
Okay, it's going to get a bit too psychologically deep in a moment. So let me talk about something else you have a habit of posting on data Twitter, the acronym MDS.
Yeah.
Pick that one apart for me. What's MDS? Why do I care? What's it about?
So technically, it stands for Modern Data Stack. And
so LAMP. Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. That's the modern data stack,
course.
Right?
Yeah, that's and Informatica and whatnot.
That's fair.
Oh goodness. It's still overall, as I've said multiple times, it's very much like a marketing scheme. Everyone wants to be part of the modern data stack because that's like what's trendy now. You see a lot of graphs of like, no, I'm part of the modern data stack. No, I am. And then like, when you get to the point where like you just have diagrams that are on top of diagrams of claiming this is the modern data stack, I think it loses a lot of the umph. But like the core value, the leading principles that makes the concept of being called a modern data stack tool is the idea that, oh, you're easy to deploy, you're easy to maintain, and like you're accessible, which what tool doesn't want to call themselves that, right? Like that is how you make the money.
Yeah. But I mean, you do get tools where their clear priorities, their top values are speed or low cost of
Performance
ownership.
or costs.
Yeah, things like
Yeah.
that. So yeah, I can see you would want some term as a rallying cry for ease of deployment, ease of use, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Rallying cry. Wow, can't speak.
Rallying cry?
Is rallying cry. I don't know why. English is difficult. But
Ah,
the the way I think about it is like it's exciting because it's like, oh, okay, this really pushes tools to think about like what kind of personas do you want using it? Do you want people who've had to train on it for 10 years and become the experts of the field, which I'm not knocking any of those people. Like I have always aspired to be one of those people who are like in the weeds, they know everything,
mm,
versus something like, hey, I'm a data team of one. How do I pick up all the things and create a pipeline with a swipe of credit card? Like that is very attractive. And also in terms of diversity is very exciting because more people can be part of this conversation.
yeah, yeah. It's nice to have a value that absolutely puts the user in the core of the
Mhm.
sentence, right? Like
Exactly.
you take a value like ROI, and the problem with that is the person who cares about it probably isn't the person that's actually using the software.
Oh,
Whereas,
100%.
yeah, but
Yeah.
usability, ease of deployment is probably putting the user right in the center of the conversation.
Yep. I think what I post a lot about is with the modern data stack, it's really a lot of people discount the developer time. They see the like time to production, but they don't really. A lot of tools in the past and also business stakeholders have just traditionally not care about the quality of life that these users have. Because even if they're band-aiding something or they're waking up at 2 a.m. because some number is wrong, that's not usually captured very easily in a metric, right? But the quality of life of if that person stays at the company is not as easily capturable. Like the fact that they're band-aiding something is not a pleasant experience and shouldn't be what we continue to support.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen plenty of people in my career move jobs because they want to use a more pleasant tool set
Yes.
for whatever their
Yeah.
definition of pleasant is.
This is probably my first sting of vendors, but like that's something I've noticed, especially when I was consulting, was people legitimately also choose the tool stack itself for what company that they work at. And at this point, there are true folks that are advocates that just will not work for a company where they're still in the legacy systems.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen someone make Jira their dividing line for a job, which is
Oh gosh. I don't miss using Jira for data. I remember being tagged on so many Jira tickets and it was rightfully painful.
yeah. I think I'm agnostic on bug trackers because I've worked in the past with a company where their
Mm.
bug tracker was Excel, and anything that's not Excel is like great.
You know, Excel has its moments, but I'm not gonna lie. I've written project plans on Excel and been on calls where I'm like, "Did you do this thing? Did you do this thing?" And it was mind numbing.
Check this out. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Okay,
people,
so
there's no tracking. Sorry.
let's carry on into the idea of usability of tools. That takes us naturally to your next acronym, which is the tool you spend most of your time with, I gather. DBT.
Yeah, it's almost like I work for the company. But yes, DBT used to stand for Data Build Tool, but our marketing department has nixed that, so it's just called DBT. It
There should be a word for that, for something that has ceased to be an acronym. I think there is a word for that.
is there?
Yeah, I think
I'm
there
sure a
is.
brand marketer knows.
There's backronym for the reverse when you start off with the word and get to the acronym.
To the
But
acronym.
yeah.
Hmm.
Anyway, so you're now just DBT, but what is a DBT? Because I've
Yeah,
never actually used it. Give me the crash course.
so the 5 second spiel is it's a data transformation framework that essentially allows data analysts to operate like with software engineers best practices. That essentially means what we're doing is you're still doing the transformation on top of your data platform, but we're providing that framework to actually make it more reusable and scalable. Very fancy words, but at the end of the day, it just means like, hey, we're now giving people who traditionally have not had access to Git version control, being able to easily automate testing and document things. We're just giving it all in the same place so that they no longer have to just be forced to not have any or be able to like tape together a bunch of different open source tools that way. And we're also open source.
Okay. So who's a
Yeah.
typical user for that then? Is it the person that's currently sitting there importing things into their Excel spreadsheet?
The persona that we are going for is what we call the analytics engineer. And I would like to very keenly note that you don't have to use DBT to be an analytics engineer. The goal here is that you have someone who's able to own more of the pipeline. They can handle enough of the extract and load, maybe using a off-the-shelf tooling like, say, Fivetran or Airbyte, handle the transformations, and do enough of the BI side of things to make it ready for stakeholders to start jumping in on, say, self-service BI.
Okay, so somebody who I can think of an example in our organization, someone who is trying to gather all the YouTube watch metrics for the different videos Confluent publishes, grab them out of Google's API, stick them
Yep.
somewhere, and turn it into a report. Is that the kind of thing you do?
Yes, exactly. That's the kind of the workflow that we're after. Is that person is going to be responsible for making sure that that YouTube data gets into the data warehouse itself, and then can handle the very usual transformations and denormalization, and then get that into the downstream tool of choice.
Right, and they're not non-technical, but they're not developers either, and in that mid ground.
Well, we do call them developers because I think it is developer is a little bit of a what is it spicy term in some ways. I know right because like
Yeah.
there's a lot of SQL is not a real language. There's a lot of that, and we don't want to live in the world that people are very like gatekeeping, right? We want to acknowledge that people with business who have the business logic should be able to own the business logic and actually write the transformations without having to go poke at, say, their devs to, hey, can I get access to the stream? Can you write this transformation for me?
Right, yeah. I think I could be accused of that one a bit. I'm of the level where I don't care which editor you use, but I expect you to have a strong opinion about the one you do use.
That's true. That's true. I mean,
Yeah.
but I don't care. Like, I don't care about your interface. I just care about like, are you able to do this with like the right set of best practices? I don't even care about like what is your SQL format. I'm sure I'm ready for the DBT community to come after me for this, but it's very much like, do you really? And I had this conversation with one of my partner engineers this morning. Is what is DBT tonic? Like a lot of people know that we have like a best practice in how we in our SQL guide. But at the end of the day, I just want to make sure that you're thinking about your code and making sure that like you're very intentional about how you're handling your modeling. Is it aligned across the board in the entire project? Are you actually testing and making sure it's of quality and that anyone jumping into your project actually knows what the they're doing? Like it doesn't take like a
You
month to
swore.
onboard to your, oh no,
Yeah.
first ding.
That's right.
You're
Okay, you get 3 strikes,
okay,
and
I
then we
get
just
one.
have to strike you from the record. Right. Sorry, I
Okay,
interrupted you
fair.
for the
No,
censors.
it's fine. This is in the recording now. I apologize to everyone who was offended by that, but I'll do my best. I will write down no curse words.
Okay.
But like,
So what we're doing is
yeah.
taking to the developers some of the things that we take for granted as like programming
Mhm.
developers, like version
Yeah,
control, testability, shareability. How do you actually do that
exactly.
in
And
practice?
yeah, so essentially, someone will use either DBT Cloud, which is our SaaS offering, or they can do it on the command line. They're connecting to their data platform of choice and connecting to their Git repo. I don't care what your provider is. Um, And then they're starting to write code. They're going to check out a branch just like a dev would and work in their own development sandbox and then develop. And when they're ready to merge in the code, they're going to open a pull request and ask for approval, run CI/CD jobs, and then merge that in. So very much like what developers have traditionally been used to. But in terms of analytics, this is pretty advanced from where we're coming from, where there's been a lot of GUI based or like using just pure Airflow for transformations, which have not just traditionally been accessible to an analyst persona.
Right. But how do you get people? I can see that persona saying, what's a pull request? What's Git? What do I care about versioning? I only care about the modern one. Can I just save it to a file called .back?
Oh gosh.
So how
Not
do you
gonna
get them
lie,
into that world?
that's the fun part. So there's different ways. I would also like to say I think Git enough to be dangerous is actually not that difficult. So, but we also do provide a lot of handholding if that concerns you. Obviously, with our SaaS offering, we have that guided like Git flow. You just click a button and then you can open a pull request. But we also have a lot of documentation where you need to know enough about Git to be powerful. So we've written a bunch of blog posts on this is how to write a good pull request. Early on when I joined the company, I didn't know Git either. I basically complained that how do I know what's good for a pull request? Like, how do I make sure I write the right amount of documentation for my approver? So what we did was just open up a pull request template. We designed that, and then now it's part of a lot of our documentation, and a lot of people take that same one or alter it and put it in their own project. So it's kind of guidance with the right amount of handholding. I also will note I think the majority of our community do still identify as data engineers. So they're not going into this blind.
Right.
They have been so sweet to also train a lot of folks in answering people about Git questions. Like our community is the warm and fuzzy that I love. It's like, because right, it's a little intimidating to enter in this new mindset with all these different tools you have to know about. Like, what is the command line? What is Git? And outside of what we can facilitate, people are one-on-one helping people and answering questions on like, hey, this is the best way to arrange a project. This is the best way to manage your Git branches even.
Yeah. And I find the almost trickier thing is, how do you convince people they care what their branches are? It's not just the how, it's the what matters.
Yeah. I know. I think you would the word tech debt probably strikes fear in you, but obviously in some folks it's a little bit new. I kind of try to balance it a lot out when I'm thinking about it, because in some ways, if you're a data team of one, there is literally no one else who knows anything about that. Obviously, you're going to work a little bit differently, where you might have to merge into production because you're literally the only person checking. But at least you're setting down the foundation. But obviously, as you get bigger, I don't think folks really need that convincing because they've been burned so many times by different tools.
Yeah. You start to believe in backups after you've lost your first data set, right?
Yep.
Is it
You
that kind of
basically,
mentality?
when you accidentally drop a table and you realize, oh God, like I now need to recreate this, you kind of know the burn. You also, I don't know about you, but when I started with auditing, it was very much copy a subset of the data into a Google Sheets, then compare it to what I believe the data should look like, and like writing some terrible. I fully admit I am not the best at VLOOKUP, and I definitely wrote some terrible VLOOKUPs to make sure that things were aligned. And after you've been burned from that, like I think you start to see a little bit of like, oh, I could have a better life just by putting in these better practices and kind of start building up the muscle and training yourself to do it in this process.
Okay, so yet again in programming, the motivator is pain, and then we go looking for good solutions.
We are trauma bonded in how terrible some things have been in our lives. After you've had to... Oh, sorry, go. No,
I sometimes
think Rock,
We've done it
paper,
twice.
scissors.
Yeah.
Go. You go first.
You go. You're the guest. You're the guest. You go.
Oh goodness, you're too kind. The key thing I was gonna say is, I think after you've had to debug like a really heavily nested subquery of 800 line, like with
Mm.
multiple 800 lines, that's when I feel like this is when we generally jump in really well. And it's like, look, you don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. We can lead you to a better land. Now you know what the dry, arid desert looks like. Kind of thing.
There is an oasis over there. Just follow the not yellow brick road, the orange brick road.
When you say oasis, and that gives me a lovely segue into streaming.
Yes.
So,
water.
because you're mostly, or your history at DBT, right, is mostly
It's been
batch
batch.
oriented. Load a big chunk of data from somewhere, SQL the heck out of it, and then send it somewhere. But
Yes.
how does that fit into our streaming world?
Yeah, I think historically we have been also limited in what we run. At the end of the day, we are a SQL parser and compiler, right? Like our limitations are what the platforms we sit upon's limitations. Like we can't execute any SQL if you can't do that. But I think times are changing. Obviously, with SQL first platforms like Materialize, but also just like traditionally batch-based ones like Snowflake and Databricks, they're starting to kind of see that light, which also gives us, we get to kind of hop on and continue on and kind of develop where that that space can go towards.
So, what does that mean in practice? Is that you're just if one of the things you connect to supports streaming and SQL, you can compile to it and you're just magically safe from having to think about any major differences? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think there is still going to be a mindset shift, because what does it mean to actually have a DAG that has both batch and streaming pipelines on it? Obviously, I know we can also debate on a streaming only system, but like I like to look at the complex world of like, at the end of the day, you're not going to very quickly migrate everything over from batch to streaming, right?
Right.
Especially if we end up in the ideal state where everything is easy. But I think it really does change up how we think about testing and even running. The idea that you can run something once, create the object, and it's ready to go constantly is very powerful. And someone on Data Twitter recently posted like predictions in 2023. Orchestration becomes a key component. And I find that really funny, because I've lived in the world where orchestration has always been very, very prevalent in the problem of managing a pipeline. And I want to live in the world where I don't have to care. I want to just make sure everything is up to date and is ready to go. So like, I think it's very compelling to have all your data transformations in one place and then execute and you're good to go. And then on top of that, being able to test automatically and very modularly. From what I've learned from speaking to other folks who've been in the streaming space, tests are a little bit brittle. They're not easily shareable. But like, I'm very excited about what Materialize has written about, which is unit testing using DBT tests, which is just using the same out of the box configurations, but being able to constantly check to make sure, hey, something's going on, you can just send an alert on this materialized view. But that doesn't actually require a lot of mindset shift. It just is a reminder like, hey, you need to know how to do this. And then you're still good to go. It's the same concepts.
What does that actually involve?
Yeah. So they, to break it down, they're using two of our core functionalities, obviously, to being able to create the materialized view that has the transformation in it, as well as materialize the test results. And then he uses a configuration called store failures. That in a batch-based world is when you execute a test, it will create a table inside of the data platform that has all the failed rows. They have changed it a little bit for their adapter and essentially made it so that it materializes as a materialized view. So it's always up to date and always running. So that test is actually just running concurrently with the materialized view itself. And then because they have alerting on top of the materialized view, you're able to then make sure that, okay, anytime there's a new row added in, there's a difference, there's something going wrong with your data assumptions.
Okay, so you've got a real-time stream on the succeeding or failing tests.
Exactly. With
Okay,
only one additional configuration.
that's interesting. I'd not really. I think we've only just beginning to think about testing in the streaming world, and I'd not thought of doing
Hmm.
that. But it's also, I think we might need to rethink the testing model because there's something
Yeah.
inherent about the way we do unit testing that says you've got this bunch of data, you run this code over it, and you get another bunch of data out, and it's inherently batch the way we do unit testing.
Yep.
Small
Because
batches,
you're
but
essentially comparing, like, this is the assumption, but that's not as powerful because, especially with streaming, your data is always changing. There's always new ones to test, and I think this is why the simplicity of this approach is so exciting to stare at, because you can now do data quality tests in a way that is actually scalable without constantly, hey, take a piece of this.
yeah, I could see that. Do you? So do you think you've mentioned the whole coexistence of batch and streaming, right? And that makes me
Yeah,
think about the Lambda architecture, which we've talked about before,
yeah.
which kind of assumed that batch and streaming would always be together. And is that
Mm.
the future you think we're heading towards, where they are naturally always part of the solution?
I think the long I don't know what the middle long term is, right? Like, I think where we're stated into, we have to land right there. And that is kind of more of the make it or break it moment. I don't, I can't have better phrasing for that, but like, streaming needs to become more accessible and almost just off the shelf as batches. And I think to do that, we need to essentially share our. There's a lot of great principles that come from streaming that batch have not been so great at because it's been a little bit too easy almost. Um,
For
and I
example?
think we have a. I think performance optimization and cost optimization in streaming, because it's already so cost sensitive. Um, I think we can definitely take principles from there and how we handle incremental models, how we think about like what to update. And that's really powerful. And we can definitely learn from that. I'm not opposed to the world where, which I think is a little bit far down given the technologies that we have today, to having a streaming one. Because as we've all iterated, if you can have everything up to date and it's fresh and it's easy, why wouldn't you? And I want to live in that world. I also want to like care less about like if I was an analyst or a data engineer, my performance reviews aren't going to be how well I orchestrate something, right? It's
Yeah.
not going to be like, oh, I managed to do this pipeline. But like, if my streams are always up to date and it's actually tested by my business stakeholders, well, why would you not be there?
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately, the people you're serving care more about the data being fast and high quality.
Hmm. Yeah.
But it's always this thing where you can't dismiss the way it's done under the hood. The users
Hmm.
can. It's our job to worry about that for them, right?
Exactly. And that's kind of where we kind of go full circle to the modern data stack, right? Like, streaming should be 100% part of the modern data stack. The pain points that we've just had is it's still so early to call. And like, I fully admit there are ones in the diagrams and I agree, but I want to push that. I want to push to see like, can we have more? Can we have it better and cheaper?
Right. So, if I'm not putting words in your mouth here, you can see us getting to an all streaming world or a predominantly streaming world, and your bigger question is what's stopping us getting there?
Yeah, I think it'll be obviously there's still more best practice to be developed. There's gonna be duel it out to see which tool comes on top. And my hope is the tools that come up on top are going to be the ones that really think about their user experience and
Mm.
like not my straw man is Bob, who at my old company owned everything. When he retired, we hired him as a consultant. I don't I don't want tools to subscribe to that persona and making sure, oh, you just have to be really smart to do this thing,
Mm,
right? Like
yeah.
you have to be smart, but you also have to be efficient with your time.
Yes, but you. So I totally agree with that, and I suspect the most user-friendly tools will win because they tend to.
Yeah, hopefully.
But hopefully, yeah. But there's always this tension, and I'm going to avoid
Hmm.
mentioning specific technologies here. But there's always this tension where you get some open source projects that launch,
Mm,
and they are clearly more user-friendly, and they are clearly broken, and
yep.
they win the race by being more user-friendly, and then try and patch themselves back up as they bought some runway.
Yep.
And that always feels icky. Can we not just get it user friendly and fundamentally correct? Do we have any hope of being that sensible?
I am avoiding also just calling anyone out, but I agree. Like,
I wonder if we're thinking of the
uh,
same people.
we probably are, and that's
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
But we just won't say it on this podcast. Um, in Twitter DMs.
Yeah.
But yes, I that's kind of why I'm extremely hesitant in some ways because in some it's all about like the right dominoes falling. Um, because like at the end of the day, we live in a capitalist society. There are people who are trying to gonna expand and try to get more of the surface area, and they have the money to back it, and that can be a little bit intense.
Hmm.
But I also do believe like you shouldn't discount that. Like there is still a better quality of life if we all go towards the same principles, even if someone's winning. At the end of the day, if you become the standard, people are going to be adopting your principles as well to say, hey, we have that too. So it's not necessarily the worst having just a few choices, right? Like it's good to have competitors, but at the end of the day, as long as we all agree, like this is what our users want, I think
Hmm.
I think we'll be fine. Maybe I'm reading a fairy tale here.
Oh, yeah. I think the moment you said getting our users to agree, I think you lost
Oh,
me.
not so much getting. I think it's more users know how they want to work, and but this is not to say we're only subscribing to one user pool, right? There are
Hmm.
potential users that will have fundamentally different feedback, and those are important to take into account. And I think that's why I often cheer for the open source tools a lot, specifically because they have that very quick user feedback loop and that trust.
Yeah. Yeah. And they know that they have a direct relationship with the people who are going to use their tools usually, and that hugely
Exactly.
helps the feedback loop.
And if they
Okay,
hate
well,
it, they'll open a PR.
yeah, yeah, and sometimes expect you to work for free to solve their particular problem, but let's not get into that either.
Uh,
But okay, so coming from another perspective, as you
yeah.
work in a predominantly batch world, I work in a predominantly streaming world. Give me your
Hmm.
critical eye. What from that modern data stack value perspective? What are we in the Kafka world doing wrong, or could do better, or should be doing? Yep.
Yeah. I I think modularity is one of my pain points. Is at least from what I've seen. Obviously, I have a limited view. I have not worked on many streaming use cases for in my consulting days,
Hmm.
but I find a lot of streaming pipelines extremely brittle because it's like, oh, you shape this for just this particular use case, and but like it's hard to pull code from that to reuse it for the bigger picture.
Um,
It's the I think it's the custom code aspect is where I want to push folks in the streaming world to start thinking about like,
Okay, I think I could level that criticism at a lot of SQL queries in the batch
mm,
world. So what's the difference? What am I missing?
I think it's I think at the end of the day, it's we're aware of it and we are. Then again, I'm not that might be a mistake, a ding against me, where I'm like, you folks are probably aware of this problem as well as your pipelines also break. Um, I think in some ways we have the tooling to assist with that and make it a lot easier. obviously DBT being one of them, but jumping in with other analytics engineering tooling, there's just more growth in time in terms of how to be mindful and how to take care of that tech debt.
Well, tell me how it works, because doesn't DBT's approach to SQL have something of modularity built into it?
We do.
Yeah, tell
So
me.
because we believe a DBT model, which is also referenced as a data model in this case, is just a single select statement. And then because we can take care of that lineage for you, specifically from just using a ref function, we are able to then build that out. And then you write in one place. If you need to change it, you change it in one place, but you can reference it down the line. When you don't accidentally lose sight of what has already been built, especially when it's very easily visualized, it makes it a lot easier to understand when you're going down the deck, when you're looking for technical debt and performance, to know, hey, I can fix that one key point rather than having to look at that 800 lines of SQL statement.
Right. So looking at this, you can break it into subqueries and sub
Hmm.
steps and see the whole
Yeah,
pipeline.
exactly.
Yeah,
And then if that code's already been written, you can reuse it for another pipeline. And I think that's one of my pain points of like folks who only work in notebooks. They can't they only see a subset of the pipelines. I can see the entire global pipeline essentially,
yeah,
like all the
yeah.
pipelines together. Yeah,
That's
global.
something we have been working on more and more over
Hmm.
here. It's interesting that we're both arriving at the same kinds of problems from what feel like very different approaches to data.
I actually don't think it's surprising because the joke here is data is always messy, and it's a lot, right? Like at the end of the day, it's just as much of data is hard, but also it's a workflow issue, and having the right tooling, but also keeping in mind what you actually care about. This is why I say like tools aren't part of your solution. Like they're not going to take care of everything. They're part of the solution.
Mm,
Because at the end of the day, if you care about that, if you care about the fact that your pipelines are desperate and like not you can't tell what that team over there is doing, then that's actually you can solve it with a tool, but there's also like you can solve it with communication as well.
yeah, yeah. That sort of relates into this idea that we talk a lot about of data mesh, where
Yes.
it's partly worrying about your data quality. It's partly a social change of mindset as
Hmm.
well as the tooling. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, um, last chance to pitch DBT.
Oh
Uh,
no.
is there anything we can learn about data testing that we should be picking up from you?
Yeah. In terms of data testing, I kind of break it down into two things. You should be able to test at every single step of your process while you're developing, while you're in a CI/CD process, especially for analytics, and even in production all the time. But what actually makes that accessible is knowing how to write a test in one time and then being able to apply it very easily. That's why our tests are just as modular and also written in SQL, which means that
Oh, tests written in
yeah,
SQL.
it is. I know the sequel train continues, but it's the idea that like your analysts know what can go wrong with the data. They know when there is a bad number, so they're able to actually write the right tests to test those assumptions to make sure that that is always up to date.
Oh, okay, so you're sort of doing like property-based testing, where you say if where value is less than zero, and that's you're
Yep,
selecting in errors.
exactly.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
we
okay.
have where statements. We also check to make sure that there's no nulls, your primary keys are aligned, you're not having the dreaded fan out. But we also have folks who are using tests to do other things, to test before you build, so you're not snowballing your the failure, and also to apply constraints. So making
Mm.
sure that like, hey, this should meet this particular primary key constraint or something like that. And we have packages there if you don't want to write it yourself either.
Okay, let's check this out. It does make me think that there's some kind of better relationship for testing. Unit testing
Yeah.
feels very batchy. SQL and maybe property testing feel somehow naturally more akin to streaming. That's something to look into another day.
I would say both are very relevant. There's assumptions you can't easily write. And so I want to live in a world where both are just as accessible and you can just pick things off the shelf to use as you like. I think that's why my concern also with just being very vendory is I want us to get away from this idea of like tools dominate the best practices. It should really be like the best practices and the tools follow after.
Yeah. The trouble with that, though, is
It doesn't really
often
work.
we're in a place of exploration where we've got to
Mhm.
figure out the best practices while we're building the tools at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah,
Right.
it's not how it works out, but I think as long as people keep in mind that that is how it should work, it's still meaningful.
Yep. No. Okay, I think I'm gonna make this the last question I have for you.
Go for it.
Again, looking to the future, what should we be watching? What's on your radar? What are you watching for in the industry?
Yeah. I'm definitely seeing where Python fits into our story because obviously we just launched it at Coalesce. So I'm interested in
Yeah.
seeing how the world decides to push what you can do in DBT with Python. Obviously, the semantic layer and metrics layer really is top of mind for me. But at the end of the day, I'm just excited to see where DBT can go in streaming.
Okay. Well, we'll have to keep watching the skies for that. And
Yes, we'll look over there, and then as we do that, we'll debate about Marvel.
yeah. And when we finally get there, we'll say that we could see the inevitable tracks in the snow when we were here,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
We'll feel prescient by the time we finally figure out what's happening.
Hopefully, it's in our lifetime.
Yeah, I hope so. Hopefully, we get some solutions in this industry in our lifetime.
Oh goodness,
Amy, pleasure to talk to you. We'll catch you again. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. It was lovely.
Well, that was fun and a semi-hopeful note to end on. And now I think Amy and I will return to our side conversation debating Marvel Comics. If you're interested, the topic currently under discussion is, could Squirrel Girl kill Deadpool? There's probably another podcast out there for that kind of conversation. Maybe we should go and find it. In the meantime, if you want to hear more from Amy, they were part of a panel discussion we recorded in Austin, Texas, not too long ago. We'll put a link to that episode in the show notes, or you can just scroll back a few podcasts to the episode called If Streaming is the Answer, Why Are We Still Doing Batch? If you want to find all the back episodes of this podcast, and vastly more about the world of event streaming at Apache Kafka, then check out our developer site, developer.confluent.io, for free courses, blog posts, and guides on how to build a modern streaming pipeline effectively. And if you've built your effective modern streaming pipeline and you need a place to run it, head to confluent.cloud, where you can spin up a professionally managed Kafka cluster in minutes. And if you add the code podcast100 to your account, you'll get $100 of extra free credit to run with. And with that, it remains for me to thank Amy Chen for joining us and you for listening. I've been your host, Kris Jenkins, and I will catch you next time.